Hello, wherever you are in the world. My name is Megan Hunter, and I am the co-founder and the CEO of the High Conflict Institute. I'm really pleased that you're joining me on this webinar. It will go for about 1 hour, and we're going to be talking about the long game of alienation. So I want to just dive right into it. I know most, if not all of you, have experienced alienation to some degree. And we know how hard it is. And I'm not here to give you loads of data and research about alienation, because I think, there are probably other people that are doing that and other webinars here at Family Access that you can view with a lot of that. I would like to focus on thinking about alienation and relationships in a different way, perhaps a little bit different from what you may expect. So we'll talk about conflict and our role in conflict and how we can participate more in a positive way and develop some strategies to alleviate our own stress, which, as we all know, it's very, very necessary in these cases, in these family situations. These are the toughest, most challenging and trying relationships in the world, right? In your life, I can't imagine that you would have anything more difficult. I know it can be terrifying to think about not getting to see your kids or grandkids. And if you're in that situation now, you're living there now. So hopefully there'll be something in this brief webinar that will be helpful to you. Maybe some of it won't apply, some of it you're already doing, but maybe there'll be with that one little nugget in there that will help you in some way. So let's get going. Before we do, though, I'd like to say thank you to Family Access and all the good and great work they're doing. It's positive and it's helpful and necessary, and a very necessary voice in the world for children and for families. I myself am a huge advocate of family. I'm married. I have 3 children and 5 stepchildren. And now I have 4 grandchildren, 3 of them from my side and 1 from my husband's side. So I'm really fortunate that I have really good relationships with my kids and my grandchildren, and some of my stepchildren, right? And there have been, I'll start this by saying I'm not immune from this whole thing, this whole ugliness of alienation. I don't want to go into a lot of details, but it's not foreign to me, and I understand how trying it can be. I understand that terror that resides in your heart. And so I come to you from both a professional perspective and have a little personal experience in there as well. So I'll kind of pepper that in throughout the way. This is Bill Eddy. If this is your first time on a Family Access webinar, you probably don't know who he is or who I am, but we are the co-founders of the High Conflict Institute, and we have done quite a bit of work now with Family Access. So you'll see Bill on some of the webinars on their website, and probably some future webinars as well. But we started the High Conflict Institute back in 2008 with the goal of really helping people understand the most challenging conflict, and which typically involves a challenging human, right? Someone who doesn't quite handle interactions, relationships, and conflict in the same way that everyone else does. We found this particularly in family court, in divorce cases, in child custody disputes. There was this common theme of alienation. And, she's not letting me see the kids. I haven't seen my kids or my grandkids in so many years. My kids don't want to talk to me. So we have alienation going on. We have estrangement going on. And it's the resistance to having relationships with one parent or with grandparents or with the whole side of the family. And this can happen in intact families. It happens in divorcing and separated and divorced families altogether. But It's very sad to me that we have to deal with it at all, because family really is the backbone of society, and family is just everything. So fostering and nurturing those relationships is great. And that's what we try to do at High Conflict Institute, is to teach. We started with teaching professionals how to handle clients. Say if you're a lawyer, how to handle clients who may sort of have this high conflict personality where there's a lot of blame and all or nothing thinking, unmanaged emotions, extreme behaviors, and oftentimes alienation, resistance, and estrangement going on. So Bill is a family law attorney with a social worker background. I just have kind of this strange background with a business MBA, but over the years, I guess my heart just kind of went toward conflict resolution as I got involved in the legal field and mediation, and just wanting to help families. So that's what we do. And a lot of our work is centered with families. Sometimes it's workplace conflict or neighbor conflict or customer service. But families, that's kind of where my heart resides. All right, so let's get started. Before we kind of dive into the PowerPoint, I could just back up a slide, I guess. We'll stay here for a minute. You know, we talk to many people who are involved and struggling in this area of not being able to be with their children, not able to communicate freely or even see them or go to their concert or go to their baseball game, or being allowed to talk to them. Challenging, tough, really disturbing. And we see sometimes this goes on for years and years and years, and typically people want to go straight to the court system. So the court system will make this stop. I need a solution. I need the judge to tell, to put an order in place that will make this happen. Well, that doesn't always happen. And I'm here, there are a lot of people that can tell you what to do in court. And I'm not saying you shouldn't go to court. I'm just saying that often there are things that you can do on your own that can help improve the situation. Now, I'm not naive to the realities that there are some cases that go on for years and years and years, and they get really entrenched and they're protracted and so adversarial. And it seems like the court is on the other side, the other parent's side, or it can just be really challenging. So I understand there's a broad spectrum here of things that can happen. And even despite your best efforts, sometimes there are still other players, other factors happening that you don't have control over. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, and sort of that long game strategy so that you don't lose hope. I've seen cases where it took 40 or 50 years for someone to gain insight, which I know isn't a very hopeful thing to say right here at the beginning, but I've seen it happen. I've seen also where there was so much alienation going on that kind of turned into estrangement then when the child became an adult, and they kind of latched on to other people in their lives, like a new spouse or a father-in-law or someone, or even a good friend, and but having nothing to do with that one parent, right? Eventually some loss occurs where that special person in their life passes away, or that relationship falls apart, or there's some other kind of loss. And I've seen then where they open their mind a bit, that adult child, and comes back into the fold, so to speak. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes it happens as kids mature and they reach adulthood, and they start to figure some things out for themselves, and there's that graduation and then the wedding, and who do I invite, who do I not invite. And it's really, really fascinating to see someone who's been alienated from their children for 15 years, all of a sudden the child's getting married, and wow, I'd really like my dad to walk me down the aisle. and they invite dad to do just that after 15 years of no contact. So it's really kind of interesting to see this long game, and I shouldn't even call it a game, but just the trajectory of some of these cases. Now, we all wish they could be much shorter, right? We wish we could just have that magic wand and it would get fixed and we could have the relationship we want. And hopefully with some of these things we'll talk about today, maybe some of them will work so that you can have some type of relationship or a manageable relationship without a lot of adversarial interactions. So, all right, ready to go? Well, let's go. First thing is to sort of stop waiting for this stroke of insight. I think we get into our own wishful thinking about what's happening. And some of us are very grounded and not naive at all. But maybe others of us are, have a lot of wishful thinking. We're so hurt, we're so wounded by this that we think, man, if I could just say that one thing that would really change the other parent's mind. Or if, maybe they're going to have something happen in their life that's just going to change their mind. Or maybe if they know how it feels to be in my shoes, it'll change their mind. But I want to tell you, stop wishing for that stroke of insight, because it's probably not going to come in a lot of cases. So especially if you're trying to do things like getting them to change their mind by, giving them a lecture or giving them a speech or writing a long letter about all the things they're doing wrong. And you may think you're writing a really great letter, but maybe they're going to take it as an attack on them. And that will just open wider that gap of trying to separate you from your child. So just kind of stop that wishful thinking, stop waiting for that stroke of insight, and instead focus on some tasks and some strategies that we'll talk about next. So yeah, this can be a long game, and it's very sad. It's unfortunate. But there are some long game strategies that you can employ, and they're often counterintuitive. That's sort of the issue, is we are very programmed to respond in conflict, in human interactions, one way. We believe that people are reasonable, rational, and they think the same way that we think. And we truly believe that if we just explain enough or argue enough or give enough information or show them some research or get the court to tell them something, that it's going to be the solution. But it doesn't always work that way. There are some individuals who engage in, in bad mouthing the other parent or grandparents or whole family to a child. And it just becomes, kind of routine, and this is what they do. And most people who do that, like 90% of people, are never going to do that. So those who do, they're governed by a little bit different operating system, right? And I think they're feeling like they're in threat mode a lot of the time, especially when it comes to their children, their relationship with the children. So if you are seen as a threat, right, what do you think is going to happen when you go in and say, give a lecture, or say, I'm taking you to court, or just come in and yell, or explain your point of view? Well, this person probably needs it to be about their point of view, and they need you to make it about them, which can be the hardest thing in the world to do sometimes. But I wanted us to kind of view this in increments. It's not all or nothing. This long game strategy is about what one little thing can I change that would make the situation 10% better, right? Would it feel a little better? Would it be nicer to have at least 10% improvement? Maybe there would be a phone call between you and your grandchildren. Maybe there could be a letter, something like that. What what could I do that would improve it 50%, make it 50% better or 80% better? Okay. So we'll look at some things we can do. But first, let's look at our own conflict strengths and weaknesses. And I remember, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I was new in my career, I think thought I had pretty good conflict resolution skills. And I probably was average at best, but I could bring people together fairly well. I was a child support caseworker, so I had to get moms and dads kind of on the same page instead of fighting each other in court, to just come to agreement out of court, and either not even have to go to mediation, but just reach agreement. So I thought I was pretty good at that, but I also had some real weaknesses where I would let people get under my skin a bit. And when they get under our skin, we're going to be more reactive. And so, it's a good idea to really know what your strengths and weaknesses are. So I want you to think here for a minute, and maybe take a paper and pen and write down 2 or 3 of your strengths that you have in conflict. And I'm talking about conflict in close relationships, okay? And also, write down 2 or 3 weaknesses that you have. We all have them, right? So let's say for me, a strength might be keeping my voice calm even when I'm upset. But one of my weaknesses might be telling someone what to do, or giving an explanation of why I did what I did. That was way too much, wasn't it? And instead of pausing and making it about them, I know that's a weakness I have. So go ahead and write down 2 or 3 things, and we'll take about 30 seconds here while I take a sip of water. I'd say let me know when you're done, but I know you can't. So I'm writing down my own strengths and my weaknesses too. Okay, so I'll share a couple of mine. So let's say my strengths, one would be keeping a calm voice most of the time, and knowing when to keep quiet instead of talking. And a couple of weaknesses, sometimes I can get emotionally hooked. And when I'm emotionally hooked, I don't stop myself before I respond to that email, although I know I'm supposed to. And sometimes I know I can have kind of a tone and be defensive. When I feel defensive, I can kind of have a tone. So, those are things I need to work on. Those are my conflict strengths and weaknesses. So we can also ask ourselves, like in an argument, do I defend myself? Do I feel like when I'm involved, arguing with that co-parent or other family member, do I get defensive? Do I feel like when they accuse me of something or blame me, that I have to defend or explain my point of view, right? Or anything like that, right? So think about that for a second. Do I dread seeing that person or even thinking about them? Does it give you a knot in your gut? Is life a whole lot easier for you by completely avoiding conflict, the big conflict or any conflict? Do I think flexibly, or do I think in a very all or nothing way? There's a difference. We need to be thinking flexibly. So thinking flexibly means I'm going to consider many options instead of it's just my way or the highway. Now, that's different from setting limits and having boundaries. But when we are in interacting with someone, if we make it all about my way, then we're not being very flexible. So that would be a weakness, to be all or nothing. Am I constantly reacting? So reacting is a very right brain, kind of negative right brain activity, and that's kind of our fear brain. So if I'm reacting every time, that person gets under my skin a little bit, or they make an accusation or a blame or a complaint, or just generally ticking you off, right? If you're reacting all the time, you're going to be in major stress mode, and you're going to stay in major conflict mode most of the time. So that would be a weakness if you're reacting. We want to instead respond. Do I have automatic blaming thoughts? Now, this is kind of an interesting one. If when you're interacting with your co-parent or your daughter-in-law, or, fill in the blank, right? If in conversations or in your even thinking about that person, your first thought is to blame them. Well, he won't he keeps me away from the kids. He never this, he always that. Now, there may be some truth, but I want you to challenge yourself, because if you have automatic blaming thoughts, you have to start training your brain to turn those around, right? And look at things more realistically. And this is also where flexible thinking can come in, okay? So challenging yourself turns those blaming thoughts into more flexible thinking. And so you're going from a weakness into a strength. And that's really what this whole part of this talk is about, is if you can identify your weaknesses a little bit, you don't have to then stay stuck in them. You get the opportunity, you get the choice to turn those into strengths. Just flip them around. So if you're a blamer, challenge yourself by exploring all the possibilities, all the options. Am I blaming? Am I trying to see the other person's point of view? Do I have some empathy for where they are in life, or what they're dealing with, or just kind of how their operating system is built? Just challenge yourself. If if I'm reacting all the time, if that's one of my weaknesses, okay, how do I slow myself down and respond? Okay, we'll talk about those in the next sections too. We're going to talk about how to do that in verbal communication and email communication. Can I stop myself from yelling or picking up the phone and calling or texting when I'm really ticked off, when I'm angry that I went to pick up my child and they're not there, and I'm told I can't see my, whatever, fill in the blanks, right? Do I just spout off immediately and email, call, yell, those things? If you can't stop yourself from doing that, then maybe take an anger management class, or maybe just get some stress relief. When we're stressed out about these things, it doesn't make us a bad person. Alienation's tough. Not seeing your kid is tough. Stressful, right? It's going to make us more reactive. So you have to work harder on not being reactive, which means you have to work harder on relieving your stress. If you need to see a therapist, right? But these are things like not being able to stop yourself that are big red flags about how you can turn around your own conflict style. Am I vengeful, right? Do you have that automatic thought of, I want to get revenge, I just want to get even? And some people do have that as a first thought, especially under these extremely stressful circumstances. So if you have those thoughts, maybe write them down, tear them up, throw them in the trash, burn them, something, right? But we don't want to be revengeful or vindictive. We want to stop ourselves from being that way, because it just doesn't help anything. Okay, so now let's talk about challenging our assumptions. What I've observed often in situations like this is a lot of assumptions are made about what the other parent or other family, what they're thinking and what the reason for their actions might be. And I see it as sort of an impediment to progress, um, in the conflict, I guess, and in understanding or advancing in a positive way in the alienation process or estrangement process. So challenging your assumptions, I guess it's a good idea to just remember you're not in that person's brain. You don't know what they're thinking. And so I guess if that is something you think you might do once in a while, challenge yourself. What is that other person thinking about? I don't know. Maybe I should explore that a little bit or not just assume. If something goes wrong, if something doesn't go as expected, are you making an assumption about the motive behind it? It could be something very different. Now, in some cases, it will be exactly what you thought it was, but I always want you to challenge your assumptions because they will, get us down a wrong road. So you can ask yourself, do I assume that the other person or family or people are out to get me? Or do they just have their, their line of sight just set directly on me? We can feel that way. It can very much feel that way in alienation. Do I assume that their intentions are entirely bad? Are they doing it on purpose? Sometimes, yes. But I also want you to think about some folks are living in a state of fear, and they're living in a state of needing to feel connected to the children, and it feels like life or death to them if they're not totally connected. And if you're a threat to that connection, then if it's a life or death for them, then of course it's going to probably result in some form of bad mouthing or some type of separation attempt. Does this mean they're bad people? No, it just means you need to approach them differently. So it's a tough one to grasp because this topic is so ugly and it's really so challenging and puts us in our own fear mode a lot of times, that it's hard to understand that the other person might be operating entirely in a fear mode. So try not to assume that their intentions are entirely evil or bad. If you can come around that corner a bit, then it makes it easier for you to explain or to actually turn your situation into one where you're managing the interactions in the situation instead of letting it manage you. Do I assume that that person understands or doesn't understand my point of view? Another assumption, we just don't know. Do I assume things will never get better? That I wouldn't assume that. I wouldn't get my hopes up entirely high because we don't know what the future is going to hold. But don't just assume that it will never ever change, because I think that we can be assertive without being aggressive and without getting in big fights. This might be more for the conflict avoiders who just decide it's just this situation is too difficult, so I'm going to leave the country. I'll just move. I'll never be in contact with my kids again because this is hard on them. It's hard on me. I'll just let the other parent win. I've seen this many, many times because they assume it will be too hard through the court system or it'll just be too hard on them emotionally. But if you use some of the techniques we'll be talking about, perhaps you can make that 10% improvement or 20% improvement, and things can get better. It doesn't need to be a war all the time. Do I assume the person or people know my thoughts? There's that big assumption again that they think we think they know what we're experiencing, and that they might have some empathy for us. If they're in, a threat-based environment in their brain, then they're probably not going to have that empathy for you or know your thoughts. So don't assume that they do and that they get it. And then moving on to roles in this dynamic. As you know, families are families can sometimes be really tough, whether they're intact or divorced or separated. And we all play a role in our families, and it might be down to birth order. It could be the influences and role modeling that the parents have and the grandparents have on the family unit. Your own temperament. You might be the shy person in the family, and you've got a sibling who's loud and boisterous. So we all have these roles we play. Some are protectors, and some are, the baby of the family, that type of thing. In alienation, we've got this big old conflict in the middle, and it seems to be, a war. It seems to be dividing everything, and we have to look at what our role is. Are you the fighter? Is that who I am? I'm going to be the fighter in this. It's going to be war, or am I an avoider? You see down here on the bottom right. Maybe it's your left, I'm not sure. And my head's almost in front of it. If you're the conflict avoider, it's great to not be in conflict, but if it means sacrificing opportunities for progress, then maybe not so great. Or are you the peacemaker? Are you the one that's being assertive and continues trying to use your best efforts through communication, through good emails, through good verbal communication, and lots of other setting limits, things like that? What is your role in this? So if you're the one that's being loud or accusing and blaming, if you are gossiping about this to a whole lot of other people, or going on social media saying, I'm being alienated from my kids, and these people are awful, and my ex-wife is terrible, and we don't want to do that. And I've seen that on social media. I think we've probably all seen that. And if you are trying to not be in war, then that's not going to help. So you have to question yourself, is this going to hurt or help my situation? Is this going to hurt or help my children? It's probably not going to help if you're going to war, or if you're exposing information about the other parent, or about private conversations, or attacking them publicly. It just doesn't work well. If you're attacking them to the children, bad-mouthing them, not great. Regardless of how you feel about that other parent, it's a good idea to place value on that person, so that your children understand that everyone has value. And some people have behaviors that aren't great, and some people have, and we all have both, right? Good and bad behaviors. So we want to role model being a peacemaker. We want to role model being someone who manages their emotions. We want to role model having moderate behaviors and not extreme behaviors. We want to role model taking responsibility for our actions and not blaming. We want to role model being flexible in our thinking through a lot of options, instead of just being all or nothing. You're my friend, or you're my enemy. Okay. Now let's talk about reducing stress. This is one of the biggest problems, I think, and I get it. I think there are a lot of bad things that happen in the world, but to not have access to your children, influence in their lives, is really hard, and it's just not the way it's meant to be. So, yeah, it can be stressful, but you have to take care of yourself, and it's okay to take care of yourself. I think I see a lot of people going in the weeds in self-care because they're so focused on just trying to survive, right? If you're one of those people that's like, I've got to go to work every day and I have to, I've got a lawyer bill to pay because we're going to court again, and, all of that, that's all really stressful. Um, on top of that, the heartache is really stressful. If you're stuck in your right brain a lot and you're very reactive, that's stressful because that's releasing that stress hormone in your body and it's not good for you. So we have to take care of ourselves. It's okay to take care of yourself. So just a few little tips here. Remind yourself to think flexibly. Don't allow fear to overrule you, right? If you're feeling those negative thoughts, if you're feeling stressed, tense, if you're thinking about the situation for a majority of your day, you got to turn those thoughts around. And one way to do that, and if you don't pray, that's fine. If you do, pray more. Every time you have a negative thought, pray about it because it can turn your thoughts around. If you're not a prayerful person, when you have a negative thought or a sad thought, right? Retrain your brain. Say, okay, I know this is reality. This is what's happening. This is how I feel. This is what I'm angry about. This is what I'm stressing about. But I can turn that around and think about my options, what I have to do. And one of the options might be to take a nap, right? One of the options might be to write a list of things I have to do tomorrow. Writing stuff down relieves stress. Writing lists relieves stress because it gets you shoved into your left brain, which gives you more of a whole brain experience, which is very calming. So whatever technique you want, can use, just remind yourself to use it. Put on your calendar every morning, just have it automatically pop up to, take care of yourself today. Here's how I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to go to my exercise class. I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to play with the dog. I'm going to call my mom. Whatever it is that's going to help you feel relaxed and a little less stressed. Now, another thing, and I didn't put this in the notes, is getting outside of yourself a little bit by doing something for someone else is just hugely stress relieving and gives you some perspective. Okay. Doesn't mean that your situation improves, but it means you're going to feel better. And you need that. You need all of that happiness coming through you. Now, this is a big one. Approaching the very people who don't like us, right? Now, if you're in a situation where you don't have any interaction with your children or with the parent or grandparents or whoever of your children, and there's no chance of it, then this would be a hard one for you. But if there are interactions of any kind, email or verbal, you end up at the same graduation at the same time, or at the store, or you need to have a conversation with someone, then there are some ways to do it that won't end up in self-sabotage. That's a good thing. So let's see what we have here. We want to create what I call a threat and reduced environment. I just think alienation and separating kids from their parent or grandparents, and other family members doesn't happen unless that person feels a threat, a threat to their children. Now, I could be wrong, and there may be other trainers that'll say something different, but I think down at the very, very deep core, there's some fear there. Otherwise, that person would want interaction of you in the child's life, right? Unless you're, some mastermind criminal or serial killer or abuser or something, where we do have to have protections in place. I think most people know that it's good to have family in life. Now, it's 2023, the beginning of 2023 right now, and it seems that family is just not as important in some segments of society. And it always shocks me unbelievably when I hear people actually say that, my child doesn't need the other parent. I'm just going to have a child on my own. And I'm not judging or condemning anyone, but I think children really get so much from both parents. So, just honestly, I'm a big advocate of families. All right, so creating a threat-reduced environment for that other person or whole family. Manage the interaction instead of letting it manage you. How do you do this? You do it by putting the focus on them instead of warring with them, okay? So we've got to make things about them because they feel like you're going to fight against them. And instead, if you're making conversations or interactions about their needs, it keeps the threat level down, okay? So we make it about them. We can still get our point across and get our needs across. We just do it in a little bit different way. We do this by making them feel important. Some people need to feel important, especially if they're, engaged in this type of activity of bad mouthing you. You may be in reaction mode, or you may just think, hey, I need to let them know how bad they're being, how wrong this is. That is not going to work to get them to a place of lower threat. Okay. So we just make them feel important in the child's life because that's what they really need to feel. Remember, I told you it would be counterintuitive. So, and you may have tried some of this and it's backfired. Doesn't mean you can't try it again, but you know what you have done and what you haven't tried. So maybe give it a try. And you just let them know that they're important in the child's life, and so that they don't feel threatened, that you're going to take the child away, that you're going to turn the child against them. Even if they're the ones doing that, it's okay for you to make them feel like they're important and necessary in the child's life. They need to feel connected to that child and like they're in charge and they're in control. They need to feel valued and respected by you. It can be so hard to do, and I know this, but this is what I meant on that first bullet point of managing the interactions, managing the situation, managing the relationship, instead of letting it manage you. It's just doing the opposite sometimes of what you feel like doing, and the opposite of what you're used to doing and think is the right thing to do. And I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm telling you that with some people, you can't manage the relationship or engage in the relationship and interactions the same way you do with everyone else. You have to take a different strategy. So, and this is it, they need to feel connected. They need to feel respected. They need to feel like they're in control. And you may be asking yourself, well, Megan, why would I perpetuate that? If they need to be a control freak, why would I want them to feel even more of a control freak? It's not that. It's just that as you make them feel important and in control, they feel less threatened. And when people feel less threatened, they're less fearful. And when they're less fearful, you make more progress. They don't need and won't tolerate your arguments, your defensiveness, your point of view, any of that. So we can just forget about all of that. We can forget about telling them they're really a difficult person or a high conflict person or unreasonable. Just keep all that to yourself. You can go home and make notes about it all you want. Make your list of this person is really a jerk. This person is unreasonable. It'll get it out of your system. But if you say it to them, it brings the threat level up. So try to reduce the threat level. So now let's dig into something that's really the critical piece to all of this. And that's how we communicate in conflict. And this is how we do it differently. Like I just mentioned in the previous slides, you have to do the opposite of what you feel like doing and what you're used to doing. And most everything we do that's going to impact our interactions and our relationships with the other parent, the other family, grandparents, child is done either verbally or in written communication. So I want to talk about first how to talk a little bit differently and how to write a little bit differently. So let's talk about what we shouldn't do in our verbal communication. Try to avoid arguing. It just is going to go nowhere. And when people come, we do a lot of coaching and consulting with people who are in just really tough situations. And it's kind of interesting as we talk one-on-one instead of a training like this, and they kind of will give me a situation about, I was just so frustrated because, I just kept trying to explain my point of view to this person, and it just kept going around in a circle, and I couldn't get it to stop, and I don't understand. Well, it's because you're probably dealing with someone who operates in this threat environment, and anything you argue about is really making it about your point of view, which you can do with most people, but not with this person. So we just avoid arguing, defending ourselves, engaging. And I don't know, I should probably remove that point in there, because if you're talking with them, you're engaging. But what I mean here is engaging in a negative way, which is being defensive, telling them, lecturing them, telling them they're wrong about something. Avoid focusing on the issue, which might sound a little weird, but if you're being blamed for something, it could be just because they're really upset in that moment and they've got to get it out right now because it's just trapped in their right brain and no impulse control, it's coming out. Sometimes the issue is not the issue. And so I'll give you a little strategy of how to not focus on the issue so much. Don't focus on yourself and your needs in the conversation so much. We're going to get those needs in there, but we don't start there. That's where the conflict happens. That's where the arguments just keep going is, okay, you've said your needs, now I'm going to say my piece. And it goes back and forth and it's on and it doesn't stop. And someone's going to storm out of the room or off the phone. Avoid defensiveness, blaming them, giving them your opinions, admonishments, or advice. It just doesn't go well when you do. Think about that yourself and think back to a conversation you've had, or of a fight you've been in, an argument you've been in. Where did it go wrong? And you'll typically find that if you'd have stopped the argument, by giving your opinion or explaining your point of view, and replaced that with what we are going to talk about in a minute, the calm before think strategy, I think that's where you get the change. Okay, here we go. Calm before think. This is the game changer. All right, whether it's short game, long game, it's the game changer. With this threat environment, we have to get people feeling calm first before we can have any engagement, before we can have that conversation. So it's calm before think. And this is you managing the relationship. So it's okay, you need to be calm too, but this is what you're doing for them. So you're getting them calm before you get them thinking. So I want you to think about it. Is this typically how you do things? Right? So you're in this conversation and you're just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Well, you're going into getting them when they're upset, right? And they're blaming or complaining, or that's not fair, you didn't, whatever, right? And you then just defend yourself or explain yourself or tell them they're ignorant or whatever, or even just start asking them questions or using logic. They aren't ready for that until they're calm. And the way we're going to get them calm first is to connect with them with an ear statement. And then second part is to shift them into thinking with a question or some information. So remember, I call this ear plus. Ear is empathy, attention, and respect. We're going to connect with them to calm them with an ear statement. So something with empathy, attention, and respect. Like, oh, I respect your efforts here. I'll pay attention. Okay, so let's say you've got this complaint. Well, you didn't tell me you were coming over first. You sent that letter and you shouldn't have done that, or, I'm never letting you see the kids. Now those are some pretty big accusations. Typically they're not that big, but you don't have to say in that moment, I'll pay attention. But there's something you can say that will calm their right brain where all of this is coming from. The threat is coming from, the feeling of threat. And you give them a little something that's going to calm that threat down. And it's an ear statement, something that shows empathy, attention, respect. That's what they're craving. That's what will bring the threat down. Well, I'll listen to you. Tell me more. Let's see what we can do. Yeah, I see. I get that's frustrating. Let's work together on this. Yeah, this can be confusing. I see what you're saying. Now you see here, wrong side. Sometimes I do the SSN. It's better to just shut up, smile, and nod. You don't have to argue with everything. You don't have to have a comeback for everything. You don't have to interact. Sometimes you can just go, oh, okay. That can be ear. It's fine. It's fine. And it can keep you out of a lot. As long as you're, giving attention, instead of like looking at your phone, like, no, give attention. Oh, okay. I see. All right. Now this takes some discipline, but once you get used to it, it's so empowering. Like if you try it once or twice, use an ear statement when someone's yelling at you and you go, oh, I can see why you're frustrated. And then they calm right down and you're like, what? How did that happen? Hugely empowering. And the next time you might forget to do it and you feel emotionally hooked and you refuse to do it, but you have to be disciplined to do this because it's that road to reducing the threat. Use a calm tone of voice. Don't escalate. Don't get condescending. Don't get that tone, right? I have that tone sometimes. I know I do, but you've got to keep it calm. And it's going to take practice, especially if you've been in this alienation deal a while and you're really, you're on the edge. It can be hard to not use a tone, but, don't try to go through your stress reducing techniques. Remind yourself, I've just got to stay calm when I'm talking. Use ear statements and be careful of my body language and my facial expressions, because that other person's brain is looking for those threats. And if your body is, your arms are crossed and you're angry and looking ticked off, or you use that condescending tone, it's just going to increase the threat level instead of decrease. Okay, so that's all to calm someone in a verbal interaction, whether it's on the phone, on Zoom, in person, whatever. So you get them calm before you get them thinking. So calm before think. And we're going to get them thinking through questions and information. So we give a little ear first, and then we engage with focusing the other person on a choice with a question. Asking them to make a proposal, or giving them some information. The key here is to give ear first. Give a little ear to connect and calm them before you ask a question, that focuses them on a choice, before you ask them for a proposal, or before you provide information. I'm going to show you some examples. So here's their complaint or accusation. You upset Kayla when you sent her that letter, and I won't allow you to make her feel that way ever again. Now, there's some upset emotion in this. There's some all or nothing thinking. I won't allow you to make her feel that way ever again, right? There's some high conflict in there, okay? So I want to ask you right now, what would be your normal response to that? You're that parent that hasn't seen this child for a long time, and you wrote a letter and had it given through the Thanksgiving dinner or Easter dinner or whatever, through a relative, had them slip it to Kayla, right? And the other parent didn't know about it. Now the parent finds out about it, yells this at you, and Your normal response or reaction might be, well, screw you. You know, who are you to, or your response might be an explanation like, well, I only did it because, I knew you wouldn't give it to her. Okay. Either of those reactions or actions are just going to raise the threat level. That's just going to keep the cycle going. So how can we subvert that? Here's the complaint again. You upset Kayla when you sent her that letter, and I won't allow you to make her feel that way ever again. There's blame in there too, obviously. I forgot about that. And that makes it sort of high conflict. The blame, the unmanaged emotions, the extreme behavior, never seen her again, and all or nothing, right? So here's an your statement to as a response is, well, I see, but I definitely don't want to upset her. Okay. So that's a calming ear statement. It depends how you say it. If you say, oh, I see, that ain't going to go well. But if you say, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. I definitely don't want to upset her. That's the calming the right brain. And then you can follow it up with a question like, can you help me understand what was upsetting to her? Okay, so you don't want to ask that question before you've given the ear statement because the left brain isn't ready to hear that question. So you give the ear statement first, get them across the bridge over into left brain where you can ask a question. And if they still respond poorly, I'm not answering you, I'm not talking to you, you can try another ear statement. If that doesn't work, then maybe you can't have the conversation and you just set the limit and say, well, we can talk about this another time. Don't say, see you next year. So it's all about managing your own emotion, managing your expectations, and trying to use ear plus calm before think. So this is then using what last example was using a question. So you get them calm and then you follow it up with a question that makes them think. Thinking is a great thing. This is where you want people. Now this is the same example. I'm never going to let you make her feel that way again. And you give the ear statement. Oh, I see. I definitely don't want to upset her. Then you can follow ear up with a proposal. Do you have a proposal for how I can communicate with her in a way that's not upsetting? And that way, all of these things you see that you're making it about them, but you're still getting what you need, right? Hopefully, you're giving it your best shot. Never going to work 100% of the time, but try this. It generally works. It's just the opposite of what we feel like doing and the opposite of what we're used to doing. So you have to practice. And then this is an example of using ear plus a little before you give information. So you upset Kayla, and I'm never gonna let her make her feel that way ever again. Your ear statement. Oh, I see. I definitely don't want to upset her. And then you give some information. Would it help if I shared my thoughts on why I wrote the letter? Right? So the other parent may say, no, I'm not interested. And you can say, okay. And that can be the end of the conversation. And you can say, we'll talk another time, whatever. But you can try this. And at the very least, it will calm the conflict and get you out of it instead of getting engaged in a complete cycle of war and arguments and opinions and getting someone really upset, probably you, feeling very badly for a long time. So you can try this and see how it works. We know it works really well. It can just be really hard to do until you practice it quite a bit and you feel that empowerment. All right, now let's talk about written communication. And this is how to respond to hostile emails and text messages and DMs and whatever, social media posts, anything in writing. First, you can decide if you need to respond, and sometimes you don't need to, but if you do, then you just go ahead and write your email or your message, whatever it is, and then we're going to Biff it. So let me tell you what Biff is. If you've heard our seminars before, we always talk about ear and Biff because they're the most powerful communication tools we have in conflict. So we never not talk about them. And it's a good reminder, even if you know about Biff, it's always a good reminder to use Biff. So what is it? Keep it brief. 2 to 5 sentences. Doesn't need to be longer because you don't want to give people something to fight back against, right? And typically we want to defend ourselves when that emails come that's really blaming us for something, or, you know, throwing you under the bus, or, you know, you've had those emails or text messages. So just remember, you don't have to respond to every bit of that. You want to keep it really brief. And the goal of Biff, by the way, is to stop the emails from going back and forth, and just shut it down. So informative, just use factual, straight information. Use neutral terms. Don't give your opinions. Don't give any blame. Don't defend yourself. Don't try to give them insight about their attitude. No arguments. A Biff has none of that. Okay. So when you're biffing, you've written your email and you try to do the best you can to make it Biff, then you go and Biff it. So you're going to say, is it brief? Is it 2 to 5 sentences? Is it informative? Oh, there's some opinions in there. Oh, I gave an admonishment. Take those out. Okay. And then we ask, is it friendly? Which, as you know, can be really hard to have a friendly tone when you're being attacked or blamed or complained about. But it's just a friendly greeting. Good morning, good afternoon. If it's a text message, I know we don't have those kind of greetings. So then you just make it a tone, a friendly tone, and a friendly first sentence. Thanks for the information. Thanks for your feedback. Something like that. Thanks for bringing this to my attention. And if it's an email, you can give it a friendly close, or even if it's a text, you know, just something friendly, like have a good weekend or something. Firm, we want to end it firmly and just close the conversation. And you can do this, like if you really don't want a response back, and you can just make sure you don't have a hook at the end. And a hook is something that's going, you know, is they're going to write back and say, well, you blah, blah, blah. Okay. So take the hooks out, and then, and you know what they are. We definitely know when we have a hook in there, because if you have taken all the stuff out from the informative part, like advice, admonishments, opinions, blames, then you're left with just the basic facts, just information, neutral terms. And if there's still one thing in there that has a little bit of an admonishment, that's a hook. That is a hook, and you got to take it out, or you're going to get an email back, and that's just going to upset you more and keep the conflict going. The other option is when you need a response back from them, have your last sentence be a question that gets them to focus on a choice between two things. And that gets people thinking more, and they just focus on that instead of focusing on giving more opinions and blame and things. Then we want to avoid the 3 A's: advice, admonishments, and apologies, right? We don't want to give advice or admonishments because those are just going to build up resistance, going to give them something to fight back against, and they'll just write more. And remember, that's the opposite of what you want. Apologies, if you're accused of something, it can be some of us will feel very attacked and intimidated and will apologize. Some of us will think it's just the right thing to do in conflict is apologize. It's going to calm the conflict. Well, if it's a really high conflict situation, like there's a lot of blame and unmanaged emotions and things like that, and it's just going to validate in that person's mind that it is all your fault, and then they'll go tell the judge, well, you know, he or she apologized about it, so yeah, they must have done that. So you want to avoid that. So we have a little example here. I've gone over an hour. A text from parent A. Don't even think about seeing Kayla after the stunt you pulled, giving her a letter without running it by me first. The courts don't look kindly on sneakiness, and you know that you aren't supposed to be going around me. We know that's a high conflict email, right? Or text. Your response. I had no choice but to go around you. I want to see my daughter, and she wants to see me. You are preventing this from happening. You are the gatekeeper, which the judge said isn't permissible. Okay. Now is that a Biff response? This is where I want you to go in and be disciplined and go, is it brief? Yeah, it's 2 to 5 sentences, no more than 5, so that's fine. Is it informative? Meaning, does it have opinions? Does it have blame? Does it have defensiveness? I had no choice but to go around you. That's kind of a defensive thing, right? I want to see my daughter and she wants to see me. That's informative, but you have to ask yourself, is that going to inflame it? Are you going to get a response back like your daughter doesn't want to see you? You know, so have to look at that. Is it friendly? Not necessarily. I would start it with thanks for your, thanks for sharing this information with me. Something like that. It's not being placating. It's just being, you're just calming the right brain. And then is it firm? The judge said that this isn't permissible. Is that a hook or is that being firm? That's probably a little bit of a hook. So we take those things out and you're left with just a bare basics email that's not going to inflame the situation. Just remember, there's no one right way to write a Biff. It depends on the writer, the reader, and the situation. You can read a lot more about Biff and take courses on it on our website at highconflictinstitute.com. Lots of articles on there. We have a course called New Ways for Families that is specifically for challenging cases like this. And my co-founder, Bill Eddy, that you saw at the beginning, has a book called Don't Alienate the Kids, Raising Resilient Children. So that's it's just full of great information that you can do if you're in these situations. I've taken enough of your time. I really wish all the best for you. And I just hope and pray that you'll have good relationships and you'll get to have relationships with your children and full family. All right, take care.